Welcome to Poulton in Cheshire, which 850 years ago was owned by the Cistercian monks. Then it would have been a hive of industrial and agricultural activity dominated by its nerve centre, Poulton Abbey. The Abbey's been lost for centuries, but 11 years ago, a local archaeology group set off on a quest to find it. So far, they've uncovered a chapel, hundreds of skeletons, a Neolithic henge, and a mass of artefacts from the Mesolithic right through to the Roman. But no Abbey. That is, until now. 11 years on, and in the middle of 9,000 years of activity, they've discovered these earthworks, and they're convinced that this is the Abbey. Are they right? We've got just 3 days to find out. The village of Poulton lies 5 miles south of Chester on the English border, separated from Wales by the River Dee. For the past 11 years, a local archaeology group, the Poulton Research Project, have been excavating a chapel here. They haven't got a precise date for the building yet, but they do know it's too small to be an abbey church. And although they've been investigating the surrounding fields, they've found no evidence of the abbey on this site. But Mick, whose passion is anything monastic, is relishing the search. He's also found a map of the Poulton estate from the 17th century, and it clearly shows a stately home in the middle of this field next to the river. Mike thinks that this building was converted from the original abbey.
Based on this map, 8 years ago, we put in 2 small trenches, and one of those trenches actually produced a very fine, winding staircase, sandstone staircase, descending into the ground.
But why did you dig here?
Because of this claustral arrangement of buildings, basically, which has this sort of, to us, appeared like an abbey.
Does that work for you, Mark?
Well, it does, because very often later buildings on the site will reflect the layout of the early monastery. You know, if you've got a cloister in the middle, and a church on one side and ranges of buildings on the other 3 sides, that can be reused and end up as a square like that.
Jonathan, is that indigestion, or are you just not...
Well, I can kind of see this sort of cloistral plan, but at the same time, I mean, a courtyard plan would be an absolute classic for a great medieval house. I mean, I do know that we get a lot of monasteries in the 16th century being converted into houses, so yes, it's possible.
Yeah. OK, if this is the abbey, how are we going to prove it?
Well, I think we could do a survey of the earthworks, because they might actually reflect what's going on underneath. We could reopen your trench and have a look at the stonework in that. And then I think we do some geophysics right across it and see if we can see the plan of the layout in the ground.
Its short lifespan means that we could find a rare example of an early abbey, unaltered by later building phases.
Brickwork, there we go. There we go.
But it could also mean that there aren't any substantial foundations to find at all.
There it is. There we go.
We have the deed that set the monastery up.
So we've brought in historian Alan Thacker to help us out.
And what seems to have happened was that the Earl of Chester, Ranulph III, appropriated the monastery at Poulton and used it to endow his new establishment near Leek.
So, in layman's terms, the Earl of Chester, who lived near Poulton, lured the monks away from the abbey here to his estate at Leek in Staffordshire. He hoped that by sponsoring a new abbey called Dewlacress on his estate there, he would guarantee his own passport to heaven. At the Abbey field, Matt's a step closer to finding the staircase and, fingers crossed, getting our first glimpse of the Abbey. Yeah, Matt, there's certainly not an absence of archaeology in this trench.
No, the trench is full, isn't it? We've got stuff from, as far as I can see, lots of periods here. We've got these quite modern-looking brick walls in the middle there. Over in the corner, there's some sandstone, and then there's this line of sandstone going along here as well.
There was a trench put in somewhere over there about 8 years ago, which showed this, which appears to be an early doorway. So that's the rebate of the door, and then the door would have shut and swung against it.
So what's going on here?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I think that's actually an earlier wall, and this doorway's been punched through it. So that's potentially the earliest thing we've had on the site so far.
Down in the chapel field, Bridge is struggling. Her progress for finding dating evidence for the chapel is being hampered by the hundreds of skeletons buried on this site. These need meticulous excavation. But then again, perhaps they can help us out with a date.
Alan, have you got any dating evidence at all for the burials?
It's a bit tricky, that, because the grave fill, we found medieval pottery, but also Roman pottery, so there's quite a mixture, so it's very, very difficult to date exactly.
I know you've had some analysis done of the bones. Have you found anything that tells us who these people were and what their lifestyle was like?
Yeah, well, most of the adults we found, their bones show a lot of wear and tear, so it looks as though they're mainly labourers, and quite stocky build on a lot of them, so we think that most of them are sort of labourers from the local parishes.
Right.
So a trench goes in over the earthworks. In the other two trenches next to it, the archaeology is looking more promising by the minute. The staircase made of medieval stones beginning to emerge. And we've uncovered a massive medieval wall that must have been part of a huge building. But although the archaeology is looking positive, Mick and Stuart just aren't convinced that we've found the Abbey. Mick, you can't spend 3 days going, oh, this is a tricky job, oh no, the Abbey's not here. What are we going to do? Fire me up with some enthusiasm for what we might do.
The problem is with the Abbey field, as we're calling it over there, is that it doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right topographically for the setting for a Cistercian monastery. Main ingredient really for establishing site of an abbey is a water management system, because when the Cistercians build a monastery they need flowing water through streams to divert into the claustral buildings, to flush the lavatories, provide water for the kitchens, etc, etc.
They're great water engineers, basically.
So if we can identify places where those stream patterns are, then we can really narrow down where the abbey might be.
So you're going to don your metaphorical habits tomorrow and go off on a prowl?
Well, we might go in the helicopter, I don't know.
Over in the Abbey field, we've had a bit of a setback. First of all, the earthwork trench has revealed no trace of the Abbey, but only 19th century brickwork, so we've decided to close it down. And in the staircase trench, we've got lovely steps made of medieval stone, but not necessarily a medieval stone staircase. Mick, fantastic. Look, we've got the staircase.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there is a problem with it.
Which is?
There's a brick under it.
Where's that?
Down there, look, in that corner.
Oh, what, this thing down here?
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
Well, it probably means it either isn't medieval or it's been repaired at some stage. But come and look at this over here.
Well, this is the trench that Jonathan got us to put in, isn't it?
Yeah, and you see we've got this whacking great wall in the bottom of it. You know, that must be medieval.
So, is this it? Have we got the Abbey?
Well, I don't know whether we've got the Abbey. This may not be it, but we've got lots of other possibilities to look at. That valley over there, for example, has got all sorts of likely sites in it.
Isn't that in Wales?
Yeah, which is another country, yeah.
I don't understand how this site here can relate to that one over there. There's 700 metres between the two.
Yeah, but I think what you have to remember is it's almost certainly on the same block of land belonging to the Cistercians. So even though it's a long way away, it's bound to be connected.
Connected in what way?
Well, there are two possibilities for this, because we've got a chapel here with a lot of burials, and they're of men, women and children, which you wouldn't normally expect to get on a monastic cemetery. And it's quite likely, actually, that it relates to the settlement that was here before the Abbey was founded.
So these would be Anglo-Saxon people?
It could easily go way back to the late Saxon period, yeah. The Cistercians acquire a very nasty reputation very quickly for getting rid of peasants, you know, chucking people off the land to create the isolation that they want. So this might be related to that.
We know the staircase isn't part of the Abbey, but we've found a mass of medieval stone walls that might be. Phil, you've dug deeper in this little section of the trench. Why is that?
Well, you know the trench with the big wall in it, the big stone wall?
That one over there,
That's the one over there. Now, what we needed to do was try and find out whether that wall continued on into this trench to see whether or not we were dealing with one massive building.
And is that it?
And that is it. But you see, the interesting thing...
Hang on, so that wall there is the same wall as this one...
That's right.
So that's a heck of a long building, isn't it?
Exactly. And at the moment, we don't know how long it is and we don't know how wide it is. But we are beginning to piece this thing together. Look, this brick wall is actually sitting on top of the wall. So this wall must be later. And you can see again here, we've got this row of stones, and that stone is also sitting on the wall. So that one must be later. So we've got at least 3 phases, of which that wall is the earliest.
It might be the earliest, but is it part of the Abbey? The wall's certainly showing up on John's geophys running through both trenches. And that's not the only wall on his plan.
We've got some really good results now. You can see all the black, the high resistance, showing this building complex. And here we think we've got a parallel wall to the one in the trench. So we're going to extend this trench as Matt started to do.
Yeah.
And that looks like the parallel wall coming in here. So we can start to get the dimensions of the buildings.
Yeah.
And also a return. And that will be just under the grass here. And so that could be the gable end of whatever this building is.
By extending the trenches to uncover more of the walls, we hope to get a clearer plan of the building to see if we've got the Abbey or not. In the chapel field, Helen and Bridge are still struggling to find an exact date for the chapel so that they can understand its relationship with the Abbey.
Hi, Bridget. Hello.
And at last they may have had a breakthrough.
I think we might have got something that may date the stones and the structure that we're looking at here.
Right.
This morning, we've got this bit of pot that's actually inside the construction cut associated with the building of the chancel.
Great.
But can you please tell me a date?
May I pull it out?
I think in this instance, yes, it would be a good idea.
OK, let's have a look. I'm not even sure it's a piece of pottery. It looks like more like a piece of tile. So, oh, yeah, look at the back of it. That doesn't look like a potsherd, does it?
Looks a bit more
like a tile, so it could be a roof tile. There's no problem with it being medieval, but what you've got to find is something incredibly distinctive.
Luckily, Helen might just have that distinctive evidence.
What is that? It's a bit of stone.
Oh no! I'm really trying hard to learn pottery, but I've got a long way to go, haven't I?
So frustratingly, still no date for the chapel. In the Abbey field, more of the walls have been exposed, and Jonathan finally thinks he can identify what kind of building we're looking at. Jonathan, all I can see is a tumble of stones and a jumble of walls. What is it?
Right, we started this trench trying to target what we think is this very early wall running through here.
Yeah.
And it's telling us an awful lot more, because we've got pad stones. Do you see the positions of those pad stones?
No, show me.
I'll get in there. We've got a pad stone here, and the other one just there. So they would have taken the timber posts for the superstructure.
And are they on the inside of the building or the outside?
This is the inside of the building. Now, the other wall that should go with this is somewhere over there, and we haven't found it yet. But we do have a bit of the floor surface. You just see this clay here on this little mortar bed. Again, it really gives one the idea that we're just looking at a very basic service or agricultural building, but on a very large scale.
So, disappointingly, it looks like this isn't the Abbey after all. But that doesn't mean it isn't part of the Abbey complex. We know from the documents that this was Abbey land and it had a farm on it. So this could be a monastic farm known as a grange, which Mick finds just as exciting.
What I've tried to do is draw all the things that you might have. So the main thing is a hall for people to live in, and that could be quite high status, and it's going to have a big open room, you know, high up to the roof with smoke going out through them, and you'll also have a bakery and a brewery to make the basic foodstuffs, and it'll look like a big house with a farmyard attached to it.
Middle of day 2, and instead of getting easier, this site is getting more and more complicated. We now face 2 challenges. Not only do we have to piece together the grange on this site, but also answer the burning question, where's the Abbey? Now we're pretty sure that we have a grange in this field. Mick and Stuart are widening their search for the Abbey and are looking for potential sites by a watercourse. One of the reasons why we thought the Abbey could have been on this site in the first place. The Cistercian monks were fantastic water engineers and diverted streams and rivers to supply their monastic toilets and kitchens.
That river is too big for early Cistercians to start to control.
Yeah.
It's too wide and too big a body of water.
See where the stream comes down and takes that right-angle kick as if it's been engineered?
Yeah, yeah.
Now that's the sort of place you might expect a monastery to be.
Well, expect it as it looks as if it's going off around the field on that side, look.
It does, doesn't it? It's immediately below where the chapel site
well, that's
is.
ideal again. If that was a Capella ad Portam or the early village site or whatever,
yes,
that'd be
it would,
ideal.
wouldn't it?
Well, the best piece is this. It's a medieval floor tile, 13th to 14th century.
And do you think that this tile and this piece of stone are from the same building?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, it's a very fancy tile and it's come from quite a posh building.
Well, where's the building that this goes with then?
If only we knew, if only we knew.
If we could find it, the luxury farmhouse might be laid with a beautifully tiled floor like this. While the picture of the Grange is shaping up nicely, the archaeology in the chapel field still hasn't given us any dates. Documents help.
Well, it so happens that I've got here a document which I've discovered this morning. It's a document of the mid-13th century that explains that at their grange, the monks are setting up an oratory.
And that's a little kind of chapel thing?
Yes. He says that our order has received permission from the Holy See, that's the Pope, that in our granges we can celebrate the divine mysteries, but that should be without prejudice to the mother church, that's to say the parish church in whose parish they're sited. I think that the chapel that you've been looking at in Chapel Fields is the mother church of Poulton.
That means that it's standing in the mid-13th century. Does it give us any idea of how old its origins would have been?
Well, parishes on the whole weren't being formed in the 13th century, and it would imply that at the latest it was 12th century, and it could well be considerably earlier than that.
So this means that the chapel could predate the abbey. We've learnt enough to believe that the chapel was built before the 12th century and was a parish church serving the community of farm labourers and their families. And the site was also used as the local cemetery. Later, when the abbey was built, the Cistercian monks evicted the community from the land, and the chapel then became a capella ad portum, or chapel at the gates, on the boundary of the monastic estate, where the lay community were allowed to worship without disturbing the monks.
Our first phase is up here.
Yeah.
And that is our major wall, which comes right through the trench, and you can see it's actually turning away to the left.
Oh, we've got the turn now.
We've got a turn there, which goes over there. Phase 2 is this wall here, which is actually butted up against it. So those are our two really medieval phases. Step this way. Here's our medieval wall running right the way through the trench.
Yeah.
And then we've got a return of it going that way, which is where the girls are.
Yeah.
So far, we're still in the medieval. In the 19th century, they make a big, big change to the thing, and in goes the cellar. That's where the bricks are. They reused probably some medieval steps, and we've got another wall there, which is later, and at some stage, this becomes a courtyard.
Lovely piece of deconstruction. I'm in awe at the quality of the archaeology, but does it tell us anything at all about what was happening here in the medieval period?
I think it does, actually, particularly if we look at this 17th century map. There we go. Let's get back the right way round. So that's our huddle of buildings in here, and we are actually stood within this courtyard.
So we've uncovered these two ranges, which appear to be the Grange's agricultural buildings. We also know that the Grange complex would have had a high-status farmhouse, which might have been this range. So we're putting in a trench over here to find out, thinking that a high-status residence would overlook the earthworks, which we've identified as ornamental gardens. So Phil begins to dig another trench next to the staircase one, and within moments his efforts are rewarded.
That's a bit more like it.
Cool, these look a bit good. Phil, where did these come up from?
Well, all around here in the trench, Tony. I mean, I was just literally working my way back. And look, gone through a lot of burning, which is sort of demolition, look, all that black stuff. But then, look, it's coming down onto clay with all these tiles, and they're all been smashed up. It's not a floor that's actually laid, but they've broken it up and used it as a foundation for another floor. But we've got all those gorgeous tiles.
What do you think these tell us?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of date, they're probably 14th or maybe even early 15th century, but they're really quite posh tiles. I mean, this one's particularly fancy. We've got a bit of a lion on there. It's been chopped off there, but that should be the lion's head, and we've got the rest of his body there. But this piece in the corner is very telling. This should be part of a bigger decorative scheme from a very posh floor. Now, I was saying it was over there somewhere.
The posh bit there,
the posh bit's
yeah.
over there. But it looks as though the posh bit's actually over on this part of the site.
So the Grange would have looked something like this. There was a courtyard surrounded by half-timbered buildings. There would have been a gated entrance in the front range. The two side ranges were made up of agricultural and service areas with stables, butteries and kitchens. And the fourth range would have been the high-status living quarters. This central block was then surrounded by a series of farm buildings, barns, breweries, and it's even got a dovecot. Stuart's finally finished his study of the landscape and his search for the elusive Abbey, and has drawn a map of the Abbey estate. The Abbey isn't in the yellow area because the Poulton Research Project have established that the building here is a chapel, and they've investigated all the other possible sites here and found nothing. It's not in the orange area because the building here has turned out to be the Grange. So Stuart thinks that the most likely place is the pink area, where Helen's digging.
This is a Pulford Brook coming along here. Its old course went down there, that very wiggly course down there. And the modern Pulford Brook is this bit up here, and that's it there. That's actually a diversion of it. Exactly the sort of thing you expect to see with Cistercian waterworks. And it would imply that in this pink area in here, this is where the Abbey site ought to be.
So I think we've got to grips with the story of the Abbey. In 1147, the Cistercian monks were given an estate in Poulton by a local landowner so they could found an abbey. They built the abbey by the local stream, the Pulford Brook, which they diverted to supply the monastic complex with water. The monks evicted the local community and annexed the local parish church. This then became the chapel at the gates, on the boundary of their estate. The abbey only lasted 60 years until the monks were lured to a new abbey in Staffordshire by the Earl of Chester. And as we move on, perhaps Helen will find it underneath all that alluvium.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
In 1998, a series of chance finds scattered across this field near Manchester inspired a local enthusiast to start field walking. And for 8 years, he's been walking and walking and walking. Now, after hundreds of hours of close scrutiny, he's accumulated evidence of over 8,000 years of human activity, from the prehistoric to the post-medieval. But it's the Romans who seem to have been particularly active. There's loads of metalwork, including coins, brooches, and this gorgeous little snake bracelet. But the site itself remains an archaeological mystery. So what was going on here? Local archaeologists believe they've discovered a fortlet, but then not all the finds are military, and they cover over 250 years of the Roman occupation. So what were the Romans doing here in Warburton? We've got just 3 days to find out. Warburton's located near Manchester between the River Bollin and the Mersey. The village can be traced back to the Anglo-Saxon period, and its parish church is dedicated to St Werburgh, the Anglo-Saxon saint from which Warburton takes its name. But over the past 8 years, the locals have been finding evidence which has pushed back Warburton's origins much further. That's a pretty impressive array you got there, James.
It is, isn't it? We've got stonework here from the prehistoric with the flint work. We've even got Bronze Age, a small axe there, which is really nice. But what's really excited me on this side is all the Roman material, the brooches and some of the coins and the various little bits and bobs.
What do you think it all means, Mike?
We've got quite a lot of material here from the Roman period, which is distinctively military, the brooches in particular, and these nice little rings. But we don't get, usually, in the northwest, this kind of concentration. If we're looking at military, I think we could be looking at something like a fort or a fortlet.
It does seem to me to be a bit of a leap of the imagination. From a few finds to an imperial fort with loads of soldiers hacking away at the poor Brits.
But we do have a bit more evidence. The local Archaeology Society have put in 1 or 2 trenches already in the field, and they've got what might be an enclosure, and in one of those trenches there's a ditch, a Punic-style ditch.
What's a Punic ditch?
It's a trap, a Roman military trap.
Francis, could this site be a trap for the enemy?
Well, I think we've got to be a bit, a bit sceptical, because I've seen steep-sided ditches on farms, and to my eye, that metalwork doesn't look military. I think it could be a farm. I think we've got to be very, very careful. Rectangular enclosure doesn't mean fortlet.
So we're putting in our first trench next to the previous excavation so that we can look at the form of this ditch and decide whether it really is Punic. And this will tell us for definite whether the site's military. David, what was the difference between a Punic ditch and any other kind of ditch?
It has a standard V-shaped inner slope, but the outer face is vertical or near vertical, which means that once you've got in there, it's extremely difficult to get out, and you become a sitting duck to the defenders to throw anything at you.
Why were they called Punic ditches? Does that mean they came from Carthage, as in the Punic Wars?
No, they didn't actually come from Carthage, but the point was that the Romans thought the Carthaginians were extremely treacherous, and these ditches were meant to be treacherous to anybody who attacked across them.
As the field walkers continue to march across the field, we still can't be sure whether our Romans were soldiers or farmers. But the finds are coming in thick and fast, and we're hoping they'll give us a clue.
Have we got much? There is a lot of this stuff that looks like brick, isn't there? I wonder if any of that's going to turn out to be the good Roman pottery.
It is, it's just bloody sand, isn't it? Just sand, sand and more sand. It's like digging at Bournemouth, isn't it?
At our trench, it looks as though the Romans are about to make an appearance.
Mike, there's your ditch.
That looks promising, doesn't it?
So it does look as though that charcoal was coming out the other side, right on the edge of it.
I'll be happier when we got it sectioned.
Yeah, Francis, you put in a long jump pit.
Well, look at this.
Hey, have we got something?
Yeah, look at that. Well, careful, it took us all morning to find that.
Oh, wow. Rarely on day one have I ever seen such a cornucopia of finds. Time's of the essence, since we've only got 1 day to explore the whole field. So everyone gets busy. Everyone, that is, except Phil, who's refusing to be dragged away from yesterday's trench. And Helen's still got loads of James's finds to double-check.
It's quite worn on that edge.
So that's fixed into the wood of the cart somehow, is it, in the
I
reins?
think it is. I mean, it's some way of distributing straps around the cart.
So a rain travels through that?
Yes, yes.
First century AD.
Yeah, I mean, the rain would have run through there because you've obviously got quite a lot of wear on this edge here. It's gone quite thin.
Okay.
And at our original field, Phil's tenacity has paid off. And yes, he's got a result from his trench. I've never been quite sure why we've explored quite this far out in the field.
Well, if you remember, there was metalwork that was coming off the crest. There were 2 concentrations, and Phil's trench was to come down the hill and follow that metalwork. Well, actually, It's been much better than that. We've found 2 lynchets.
What's a lynchet?
Well, it literally is an old field system. What you've got to imagine here, Tony, is literally a stairway of fields running parallel to the slope. And what is happening is that plough soil, as you plough along the slope, soil moves down the slope. And where Francis is, you will have a bank. And down here, you've got a cutaway terrace. You can see here that you've got a dark brown topsoil. That's this stuff. And it comes straight onto natural. Now, as we come down the slope, we've got 3 layers. We've got the dark topsoil, but in the middle, we've got this brown material, which is sloping down here, and at the bottom, we've got the natural. And this brown material is where the plough has actually sliced into the natural and moved all the soil down that way. So you'll have a bank here, and here there's a big cutaway. And so you've got a whole series of stairways. And you can see that the next cutaway terrace is up there where the chap is there. So you've got these fields that are about, what, 20, 30 metres wide, going down the hill.
Do we have a date for these lynchets?
Well, we've got scrappy pottery from the bottom of this lynchet that runs through the Roman 16th century and 18th and 19th century. So we might have 2,000 years of agriculture ploughing on this site.
But the important thing is that is exactly when the metal finds were being made. That is exactly the date of all those metal objects.
What's exactly the period? The medieval or the Roman?
Roman into medieval period.
This was a purely agricultural landscape, but we now understand the mechanism by which it formed.
And until we dug this trench down here, we had no indication that there was a pre-existing field system on this hill. The only field system that we could see was the present field system. This shows that there was a completely different landscape here in the Roman and probably medieval period.
Which is why it's not on the 18th century map, because these fields are totally different.
So finally, we're beginning to reveal the history of this landscape. The lynchets are evidence of an earlier terraced field system, possibly Roman. And this would explain how the finds got into the soil, as rubbish mixed in with the manure which fed the crops.
Well, Stuart, we're getting wildly overexcited about 2 lynchets out there. How do they fit into what we know about the landscape?
I mean, if you go back to the medieval period, what you've got is the medieval village of Warburton here in red. You've got a church down here and a priory, arable ground here, meadow around the edge, and park and manor centre up here, and the peat and mosslands over here. But you've got a strip of open ground, all suggesting that this strip where our fields located is the pasture for the animals of Warburton village and the parish.
So that's the pasture on which you'd have had the animals that would have manured the arable.
That's right. This is quite important in the understanding of this. Also, the pattern of movement actually is along that road that's there today, the road that we come along, leading from Durham straight down to Warburton and then crossing over the river. The Mersey itself is an important boundary in the Saxon period between Mercia and Northumbria. And if there's Saxon occupation close to a major boundary, there's a very strong chance there might be even Roman occupation.
So those lynchets that we found are likely to predate the medieval pasture, you reckon?
Indeed, yeah, I mean, I would say that quite categorically from the evidence I can put together, yes.
So Phil begins to dig a trench in the new field over the biggest response to see whether there are any finds and to analyse how they got into the ground.
Is that in the spoil that's coming out, or is that in the... Could it be really, really small, or can't you?
Oh, it is very small, yeah.
It seems to be pretty localised, doesn't it? Is it in there, for example?
No. Let's try that for what I've got in my hand. No.
Try that. In there, then?
It's over in that corner somewhere. Must be very, very small, whatever it is. Lead.
Well, I'm damned.
It's a lead seal. You know the seals that they put on the bags? That's what I think it is.
There's quite a nice little pattern on there, isn't it?
Our prize find. Who needs Roman when you've got a seal from a 19th century seed bag? The field's now littered with trenches, and Helen takes a quick tour to see what's turning up.
No features?
No.
No. Anything good?
So the last bit that came up, courtesy of the detector, was that.
Oh, yeah.
That was the last bit we came out.
Yes, looks good on that side, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And not much on the other side, probably half a button. Never mind. Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
This whole field is dotted with tiny, discrete test pits, and suddenly we've got Phil's zonking great hole. What's that all about?
What we're hoping to prove is that there's a different pattern of finds in the top as opposed to that bit there.
There.
Yeah, then the subsoil, and then on the natural and in features underneath there.
And how are you getting on, Phil?
By and large, all the finds that we get, and they're mainly Victorian, post-medieval. The main thing is that we're recovering all the finds, not just being selective with metal. And certainly, once we get through the topsoil, which is where most of the finds are, once we get into the subsoil, we're not getting anything at all.
So what does all this tell us?
It's telling us quite a lot. I mean, it's telling us that this soil has to be manured. That's where most of these modern finds are finding their way in. And then it's also telling us that below that there's a rather different soil which may represent pasture, and then possibly earlier fields are beneath that. But that earlier soil wasn't being heavily manured.
A bit frustrating for you, though, all this digging empty trenches.
I spend my entire life digging holes and finding nothing. I went with Ian, you know, the main digger driver here. He and I dug 1,800 metres across Salisbury Plain in 4 days. And what do we find? One post hole. Was I disappointed? No, of course I wasn't disappointed. The main thing is you solve the problem. We came here 3 days ago. We came here with a set of questions. We wanted to know about the forklift. We wanted to know about the metal objects in the plough soil. And I think over those 3 days, we've answered the specific targets.
I know what did really hack you off, though. The local pub didn't serve real ale.
Yes, you're right there.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
In my hand is a piece of Roman brick. It's not very smart. We've probably seen hundreds of bits of brick like this before, except when you turn it over, you can see that nearly 2,000 years ago, someone scrawled a list of names in it. They were probably some of the 1,000 or so soldiers who were stationed here at Venovia, one of the largest Roman forts in northern England. So we're stepping outside the fort's imposing ramparts to uncover the lost world of Venovia's vicus, the bars, the shops, and beyond them the cemeteries, which would have been such an essential part of life and death for Vincentus and co. We've never had the opportunity to dig an entire vicus before, probably because it's such a massive undertaking, and we've got just 3 days to do it. Venovia, or Binchester as it's known today, lies on Deer Street, the major Roman road that ran from York through Hadrian's Wall to the far north of the empire. This strategic route was lined with forts, the backbone of the Roman military presence in Britain. And the one at Venovia is a fantastic excavated example. It's a classic layout of barracks for up to 1,000 men, kitchens and stables, and a commandant's house, complete with a luxurious bathhouse. All surrounded by a massive stone wall. And beyond that wall was the vicus, the civilian settlement on which the fort depended. But so far, archaeologists have almost completely ignored it.
There have been loads of people digging inside the fort, but actually only one person has ever had a look outside in the vicus area. It's this chap, the Reverend Hoople, in 1891, and he produced this very interesting plan of buildings here, and we've got sketches of what he found. Now, these are really substantial bits of masonry, lots of different phases.
They do look like illustrations in a late 19th century children's book, don't they? And we have been ripped off by antiquarians before who've come up with all these fantasies which you actually can't substantiate. Is this stuff real?
Well, we've got something that can help us decide, because look at that aerial photograph. I mean, this is sensational. Here we've got Deer Street, and look, what looks exactly like these buildings very clearly here. I mean, you can even see that looks like the long building there. I mean, it just looks wonderful. It looks like this is a really accurate plan.
So if you just go around the outside, and then we'll just crisscross it with lines, cut them into curves about that.
So we're opening our first trench over the area dug by Hoople in the 19th century. And it should contain substantial stone buildings belonging to the vicus. But all this area, including the fort, is a scheduled ancient monument, and that means our digging options here are very limited. The entire area on that side of this fence is scheduled, so we can only put in one trench there. But given how big that fort was, we think the vicus might extend over here, which is unscheduled, where we can put in as many trenches as we like, if we get the evidence. Stu, any joy so far?
Well, this field looks rather interesting, Tony, because we've got some aerial photographs. There's the fort, that's the fence you've just walked along. Can you see that angle there? That looks like it might be an annex, a ditch feature or something, an annex onto the fort. Either that or it's even a remnant of an earlier fort or something of that sort of order. And there's another aerial photograph which shows a road coming out of the entrance to the fort, heading over that way. So, yeah, there's a possibility of lots in here.
And almost immediately, we've got our first find.
Roman, our first piece of Samian.
While Phil works his way through the plough soil, our resident historian has been casting his somewhat sceptical eyes over our geophys.
Well, I don't think it's a temple, because a Romano-Celtic temple wouldn't normally turn up here, which is that kind of shape. I think it's much more likely to be a mausoleum.
Why do you say that?
Well, it reminds me of a mausoleum just outside Rome on the Appian Way, which consists of an enclosure wall and then with a central tomb in the middle.
So what's the difference between a temple and a mausoleum?
A mausoleum is a place that's dedicated to the memory of a deceased person. You might actually worship there religiously. You know, you'd go and perhaps offer sacrifices to the spirits of your departed. But I'd guess that that's more likely to turn out to be the mausoleum of maybe a commanding officer of this fort.
Well, finding the last resting place of a Roman commander doesn't happen every day. And I have to admit the geophysics results are some of the most striking we've ever seen on Time Team. So, with a strong sense of anticipation, we open our third trench over what looks like one of the walls of our possible mausoleum.
That's almost exactly the line of the wall where that sheep track is.
We'll hold you to that.
You know what I said, almost exactly?
Ah, almost exactly.
Yeah.
I've never known a sheep walk in a straight line.
No. A bit like yourself, isn't it, after the beer?
After a few beers, yeah.
We put this rather long trench in here because earlier today John did some geophys here and he came up with two things which look suspiciously like ditches. Naomi, can I come in your trench?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
This is the edge of one of our ditches. This is the ditch fill. OK, and if we come this way,
yeah,
where this lighter patch is, this is our other edge, so it's quite a wide ditch.
That is a heck of a big ditch, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that there?
Well, here it's just something we're just uncovering. It looks like a nice piece of mortaria.
Which is?
Which is kind of like a pestle and mortar for grinding food.
And this stuff here?
Again, just another nice, chunky vessel.
Both Roman?
It's definitely looking that way.
So does that mean that we can date this ditch as Roman?
I should say so, yeah.
I've built up the basic topography of the landscape as it is now, and on top of it I've dropped up what would have been the fort. And the first thing I've noticed is half the fort's hanging off the landscape.
I mean, there is a very good reason for that, because this side of the fort has actually slipped away. There's been a big landslip on this side here by the river, and it literally has gone. So it looks rather nice, but you're going to have to lose that side of it.
Okay.
But what that illustrates really well is this high ground that the fort sits on, because it actually sits on effectively a raised island, doesn't it? The river on one side, the valley down here. That's a really dramatic piece of topography for dominating this major crossing of the river here.
Very distinctive.
So we extend Trench 2 into the area we hope's an early fort and continue to excavate our possible mausoleum trench. We've now uncovered this fantastic wall, and we need to work out how it relates to our potential cremation urn.
That's cleaning up really nicely now, isn't it? With that should be the inner face, according to the geophys, of whatever we've got here.
I'll take your word for that.
With not one but two discoveries of potentially national significance, our hunt for the Vicus takes a back seat, with only Matt left scraping away in search of the substantial stone buildings recorded in the 19th century. Matt, we've got a mausoleum down there, we've got cremation burials, we've got a brand new Roman fort that no one's ever seen before. What have you got in your trench?
Well, apart from all this stone rubble, we've got hope, and we've got a day and a half as well, so we'll see how it goes.
The mausoleum alone would be a major discovery, but we also think we might have discovered a huge earlier fort. We know the fort that's visible today was built around 130 AD, so to prove this one's earlier, we need datable evidence.
So now you've got some decent edges to the ditch, you can get down into it now, I suppose.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see how deep this goes now.
I reckon it's going to actually come a fair old way down.
I hope so.
Have you got anything coming out of it?
Yeah, we've got some nice bits. There's this lovely Samian bowl.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? You've got a date on that?
Late 1st, early 2nd century.
Back at the
And
heart
you're
of the
not,
site,
you're nowhere
the
near the
scale of
bottom of the ditch.
gun
So if we get in
fired those
first
shells
century
is now
stuff
evident.
this far up, makes you wonder what you got from lower down.
It's a promising start. These late 1st century finds take us back before the construction of the stone fort in around 130 AD. But there's no dating evidence in our first trench. In fact, despite Matt's earlier optimism, there's little sign of the stone buildings we'd expected to find.
So have you sorted this out now, Matt?
Yep, we've got it. That is the bottom of Hoopel's trench, finally.
Right.
You can see, though, that there's none of this lovely masonry left. And we know that's the bottom of his trench because, look, the most exciting find of Trench 1 so far.
Oh, well, that's not Roman, is it, at all?
You're getting good at this,
Oh,
aren't you?
yes. Bit of 19th century willow pattern.
And that was from it's from down there in the backfill, so that's confirmed that it's Victorian.
So, once he'd done those nice drawings of all that nice masonry, somebody must have pinched the stonework, in fact.
This is the first row of mausoleums to be found in Britain for 150 years, and only the second ever to be discovered. It's a find of national significance. Towards the end of the day, John started to get really excited about an area over here where he found this mysterious circular thing. So, Phil, have we found our mysterious circular feature?
We have, but it's not circular, it's square. This is it. You've got that straight edge there, and there's another straight edge there.
Yeah.
I think you could interpret that as a square mausoleum.
Is it a mausoleum for a very small person or a pet?
No, not at all. I mean, it's perfectly feasible to have a cremation in there, and you can actually get a burial in there. I mean, when you look at the size of Ian against the inside thing, you could actually squeeze a human body in there and get it in there, no problem.
So there could still be a burial there?
There could well be a burial in there.
Bridge, it's a nice piece of masonry over there.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed it. It is indeed. It looks to be part of a column. Can you see this curved edge around here? That would have been the front of it.
Why is it flat on the other side?
Well, it's really been put up for aesthetic reasons rather than structural. So, of course, as it was standing there, this flat side would have been flush against the wall of the mausoleum, and then you would have just seen that curved column on the front. So there was no need to actually build a round column.
Yeah, but this is only half the story, isn't it? You've got something fairly small over there, but you've got this massive building here. You've got a wall there, a return there, a wall there, a return there. It's huge.
Ah, but you see, you're taking the obvious interpretation, which was exactly the interpretation that I came to when I first came here, and thinking that you did have this one big building. But you see, what we've got on the geophysics is this, which actually contradicts that there's going to be a wall across there, literally going across there, and we have no archaeological evidence for it.
So we're going to continue digging for the wall that Geophys says is here, while extending our trench to see if these two outer walls do join up. The truth is, it's mid-afternoon on day 3 and the layout of the mausolea is still a puzzle. Raysan and Guy are looking at possible models. Guy suspects each mausoleum was made up of a central chamber surrounded by a walled enclosure. But to confirm this, we need to find all 4 walls.
Oh! That's it, it's it there, isn't it?
Yeah.
There, look, there it is, it's pea grit.
this has been a truly remarkable dig. We came to this hill in search of a vicus, the civilian settlement that supported the Roman fort, and in the process we uncovered an entire lost landscape. We located the vicus along the road on either side of the fort, but we also discovered a huge earlier fort which pushes the history of Vonovia back to the very beginning of Roman occupation in the north, and a row of 3 mausolea, the first group to be discovered in Britain for 150 years. We came here in search of the living, but found a city of the dead, a street lined with grand tombs, a little piece of the Roman world in the far north of the empire. And at its heart, perhaps the grandest mausoleum of all.
OK, Antonius, my brother and fellow comrade soldier at the mighty fort of Vonovia up there, we've come down the Street of Tombs to venerate the memory of our great ancestor, our great-great-grandfather, the mighty general who once acted as a soldier here, and we've come down to his tomb. Now we've got to go through the vast mighty door that would have once been here, pivoting there on iron, and in we come to the mausoleum area, and towering above us here is his grave, with an inscription that records his name, his mighty exploits, and around here other graves of his brother and his cousins, other members of the family. And these are the men who make you and me important people in the fort today, and our great hope one day is that we'll be buried here too.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.